Hey guys, I just wanted to make this video explaining in as much detail as possible how to pick an American Lock 1100. So I'm going to explain a few very basic um, foundational details that you should know, should have a grasp of if you're going to pick this level of lock. All right. Obviously, there's a pretty sizable gap between a Master Lock number 3, for example, and something like this American Lock 1100, which is a green belt lock. So, obviously, to open the lock, you need to get all the driver pins above the shear line, and then the core will turn. And in a normal low level lock, it's relatively easy because they're just standard pins, right? So you just need to apply tension and then push on the binding pin until the driver pins go above the shear line at the same time, and then everything will turn. The concept is the same for the American Lock 1100, but you need to contend with security pins. So what are security pins? Well, they are pins that have a different shape and are made to make picking the lock more difficult. So in the case of the 1100, instead of just standard pins, you actually have spool pins and mostly serrated pins. So serrated pins, I would say, are the ones that people have the most trouble with, since there's just so many clicks. You lose count of how many clicks each pin has given you, and you just get lost in picking the lock. But at the end of the day, the rules stay the same. The rule being, if the pin that you're pushing on is binding, the one that is most binding, then that should be the one that you try to set. All right. The problem comes when you have a serrated pin, and you're somebody that's coming from only picking standard pin locks. As soon as you hear that click on a standard pin lock, you're pretty much like, okay, it's set. Simple as that. But when you get caught on one of those serrations of the serrated pins, you really don't know, is it set, or am I just caught on one of the serrations? Well, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to worry about that much. You just need to keep pushing on the pin that's binding the most. So for example, if I have, this lock, it has 5 pins. Let's say I start the picking and I do the jiggle test on every single one, and I see that there's only one that's binding, which is what should happen. Let's say the 5th pin is binding. And on that 5th pin, the driver pin is actually a serrated pin. So under tension, I click, or I push on it and I hear a click. At that point in time, I am aware that this lock in particular has serrated pins. So I'm not gonna, sing victory just yet. I'm gonna be like, okay, odds are this is one of the serrations of the serrated pins. So but even having that knowledge sometimes trips people up, because they look at the serrated pins and they say, okay, so this pin has 4 serrations. That means that I have to push exactly 4 times, hear exactly 4 clicks, and then I should move on to the next pin. But that is not how it is. All right, that's not how the plug will turn. The plug will turn sometimes in the middle of the serrations of a pin. So if I push on that same 5th pin one time, all right, before I push on it again, the first thing I'm going to do is let off of the pressure with my pick. All right, I'm still keeping tension, but I'm gonna let off of the pressure from my pick, and I'm going to do a jiggle test again. And if that pin is still binding, or it feels like it's binding, I'm not gonna push on it just yet. Just to make sure, I'm going to do the jiggle test on every single one. So if you want to be safe, if you want to do it, you know, if you want to have a very methodical way of doing it to reduce as many mistakes as possible, every single time you hear a click, all right, it doesn't matter if you think that it's set or you're caught in one of the serrations, you need to do the jiggle test on every single pin again. All right, so let's say I hear that click on that fifth pin. At that point in time, I'm not gonna touch it again. I'm gonna start from the front or the back, whatever you start at. Start from the front and then, you know, do the jiggle test on every single one. And then it just so happens that the only one that's binding is still the fifth pin, which that does happen. All right, but what could also happen is that that fifth pin is no longer binding. All right, you touch it and it feels stiff, but this is, even having the knowledge of what to do next, all right, is only half the battle. The other half is actually having a feel for it, because even if you know that you're not supposed to 100% of the time click through all the serrations on the same pin every single time, that doesn't really matter if you're not able to do an effective jiggle test and tell if it's still binding or not. Okay, so it sounds kind of cheap, kind of like cliche, kind of lazy to be like, oh, you know, it comes with experience, because that's what anybody will say with any hobby ever. But it's literally something that's true, you know, and, you know, you keep practicing and practicing and practicing, and then at a certain point in time, it might not even be with this lock. All right, could be with another lock, could be 5 locks from now, 10 locks from now. But at some point in time, you will get a feel of what a binding pin is. Okay, because even if it's rigid, all right, that doesn't mean it's binding, because rigid is something that's it's subjective. Okay, there is very, very slight difference between, for example, let's say these are the two pins, all right? There's a very slight difference. Let's say this finger is binding and then this one is not, okay? So obviously if I push on this one, it's springy, right? That's obviously not the key, the pin that I'm gonna push on. And then this one, you know, I push on it, it's tight, and then click, right? Obviously this one was binding, but the problem is when you have serrations, let's say this is the binding one, when you have serrations, you do click. All right, so it's clicked, it's stuck on one of the serrations. But now I go and do the jiggle test on all of them again, all right? And I see that this one is still hard, but since it's stuck on one of the serrations, but it's not the next binding pin, it'll have a minuscule, an absurdly tiny amount of movement, of springy movement. It'll be like this, very tiny. All right, and that's what I mean with you'll have to practice and get a feel for it, because even though this one has a very tiny amount of movement, this one will be solid as a rock, no movement whatsoever. And if you don't check every single one and you just do this one, and you can't tell that there's a tiny minuscule amount of movement when you do it on this one, then you will continue. You'll assume that all the other ones are going to be springy, and you're going to keep clicking this one in, and it is still going to click because it's a serrated pin. It's still going to click, and that's what trips people up. You're going to think that you're doing well, and then you're going to try to pick it and try to pick it a million times, and you're not going to know what you're doing wrong. In reality, it just comes down to, you know, assuming that all the other pins were not binding, just because you felt that this one was a little bit tight. All right, so guys, don't forget to do the jiggle test on every single pin before you move on. After you hear a click. All right.